try.
Hey, everybody out there in YouTube land. It is I, your t-shirted historian, with my associate Grim.
Hello.
He's so enthusiastic. I love this man. All right. Well, before we bring on our special guests, I want to take a moment to say, hey, thank y'all for joining us on our season finale of Dungeons and Discussions. We've had a lot of fun, and we're not gone for good. We will be back, and I'm definitely planning on a Christmas special, a Thanksgiving Day special, and perhaps a spring break special. I don't know. Grim, are we going to get you to wear a bikini for that one?
No.
Just straight up, no.
No, just straight up naked.
Straight up naked? Oh, there you go. Hey, that's awesome. Wanted to point out that Grimm's Indiegogo for Wightchester, Prison City of the Damned, is still going. And what, you guys are 39% of the way away?
Something like that. We're doing a funding sprint. If we can get to 1,500 by Friday the 13th, then the OSR and Lamentations of Flame Princess conversion option will be unlocked early. So,
well, I have it at 1,600, so it looks like we're getting that.
Oh, when did that happen?
Oh, I'm checking it. I'm checking the numbers right now. But here is a link to that right here, and we're gonna go ahead and show the clip from the campaign real quick, so you guys can titillate you with it.
In the year of our Lord 1666 came the Annus Mirabilis, the year of miracles. The plague returned. London endured the Great Fire. England went to war with the Dutch. Newton upended an advanced natural philosophy. Amongst those miracles came the comet that raised the dead. England, still recovering from the Civil War and in the throes of the Restoration, was the hardest hit. Still, over the course of a year, the grizzled veterans of decades of war were able to put the dead back into the ground. Save Wightchester, the city which was lost, overrun, walled in, and made into a prison for damned souls. Resurrected as Wightchester. It is 1667, and you are condemned. May God have mercy on your soul. Back Wightchester on Indiegogo for more information, cheap and free products, and a chance to shape the city of Wightchester. Wightchester will be a 500-page city crawl for 5th edition D&D, Grimdark 5th edition, and hopefully Morkborg and the OSR. Spread the word.
Ooh, man, that looks good. I cannot wait. What? You should be excited, man. You wrote good stuff.
Promoting yourself is horribly un-British, and I will have no part in it.
Okay, fine. Well, then, to promote you, then we will have on our special guest, Mr. Dave Morris.
Yes, I think it looks very good.
That's what I like. Understatement. That's acceptable.
And we must have the other Dark Lord himself. We have Jamie Thomson.
Greetings, wormlings. It is I, the Lord of the Night. AKA Fat Bloke from England.
I thought you'd be taller.
Well, I am when I've got my black boots of doom on.
Crank your chair up.
Thigh-high leather ones. Well, actually, I need a new chair. That's the problem.
Yeah. Or move your webcam. That's the other way to do it.
What? If I do that, it'll all go horribly wrong. Oh, no. It's sort of all right. Is that better?
No, you're
Okay,
smaller
slightly
now.
off. Yeah.
Just keep going the way you were.
No, better not. It'll just fall off. It's just lightly perched on top of the telly. The goblin I normally have who holds it has died.
Anyway, I was just going to say about Wightchester that, it's about the catastrophic effect of a pandemic immediately after a political disaster. So,
Yeah.
Timely.
Art imitates life.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I am so happy to have you guys on this show. I've been hoping to get y'all on forever. I started talking to both y'all on Facebook years ago, but to actually get a chance to talk to you live is awesome. People say, "Oh, you should never meet your heroes," and I'm just like, "Yeah, whatever."
Well, I'm sure that it is a great pleasure for you, John.
It is very much.
Like
so.
all humans should enjoy my divine presence.
If you set your expectations low, you can never be.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I was thinking Wightchester made me think of Escape from New York, but 17th century zombies, which is kind
had
of
some
cool.
vibes from that, which is a good thing.
Yeah. It's quite a nice idea that you're just trapped in. Presumably, you're like, have you seen the recent Las Vegas zombie epic?
Oh,
you probably had, that's another
Terrible.
similar sort of idea. Well, it was sort of fun. Well, that's the other thing about low expectations. I've given up a long time ago, expecting most modern films to be any good. And you just sit back and drink some beer and look at the spectacle. It's ridiculous, but quite fun, I suppose.
We got an interesting question from the chat right here, Grim. It's strangely enough, it's not directed at our guests, but it's at you. So you have a fan there, Chaz Sexton.
What do I particularly like about Morkborg? Any ideas about involving the religious zealots of the time, diggers, levelers, Scottish covenanters, etc.? I've already written the section on the religious and political zealots of the time, the ranters, diggers, and so on. So that will be involved. What I like about Morkborg is it's nice and simple and dark. And oddly, my background is art more than it is writing. And I like the weird aesthetic that the whole game has. So even though it's a headache to read.
Them so they're like grave diggers. Sort of diggers.
I'll probably have some of that. But
mound levelers.
I figured actual resurrections would make people even more zealous and puritanical.
Yeah.
All right. Well, gentlemen, it is. I was up late last night and I'm up early today, but that's okay. I have one of my potions of stamina with me, as it were. It's citrus, tropical sunrise citrus flavored, and it's double the strength of a normal cup of caffeine. So I'm
really
fortified.
Citrus flavored caffeine. Surely you've got some strong Texican coffee, black and bitter like my heart.
There you go. Yeah. Well, this one actually comes in the form of, it's called Mountain Dew Rise Energy.
Oh, Mountain Dew, right.
Yeah.
I'll probably blow my heart out one of these days, but until I do.
Should we introduce our guests in the body of work for the plebs out there that aren't as up on these things as we are?
You do,
you don't
Dave.
have to
I'll
bother
do
with
Jamie.
You don't have to bother with Dave. He's not important.
I think Grim had better do me because we're more on the same vibe as to the level of, kind of exuberance. And TJ, you can do Jamie. Oh, Jamie can do himself.
True.
Yeah.
No, I'll ramble.
So, Dave, I know most from Dragon Warriors, which was a sort of old school RPG back in the day. The same sort of size and format as the Choose Your Own Adventure books, which Dave's also done an awful lot of. And so for me, I think, Dave, as someone who was in at the real sort of start of the British wing of fantasy gaming and was definitely a part of the whole choose your own adventure, fighting fantasy, etc. boom, I think is a important guy to talk to, and certainly very influential to me. And we seem to share enough politics to duly commiserate about various things going on in the world. So I like that. I like that very much. Over to
yes, I will say I tend to think of Grimm as, the scions in Lyonesse, where all the great wizards have got a few scions out in the world. I think of Grimm as one of mine. I see your comments on Twitter, and I think I'm glad he's going to get all the flack and I'll just keep showing.
Yeah, I've heard that before, that similar sentiment.
Well, sadly, okay, my introduction to gaming books and stuff, I had already been a fan of all the choose your own adventure stuff for a while. But when I saw my first fighting fantasy book, that immediately grabbed a hold of me. And because I'd already been a Dungeons and Dragons player from way back when I was 10. But yeah, unfortunately, Dave's contribution to fighting fantasy never made it over here. However, I was introduced.
It's only a little contribution.
Yeah,
half a book.
But I did get Talisman of Death, and that was my first introduction to...
Hold on a minute. You have to say Talisman of Death.
Talisman of Death.
Not bad.
I could always put the vocal on if you like.
Fighting fantasy titles have to be said in that way. Siege of Sardath, or Forest of Doom, and so on. Or Sword of the Samurai, my other FF book.
Yes, Sword of the Samurai was my second foray into...
Oh, right, cool. In fact, I have the sword here.
Cool.
You could basically kidnap anybody and send the ransom demand just live without all the tech.
Yeah, we do.
Wow.
Yeah, I love Sword of the Samurai. That was probably one of my favorite fighting fantasy books because it was so different from all the other ones because it was so heavily Asian inspired. I was just like, oh my god, whoever wrote this really delved heavily into Japanese mythology.
I did a lot of research. And
it
then
was great.
I can't remember whether we did Way of the Tiger first or Sword of the Samurai first. That's we were doing it at the same time. But if there are any Way of the Tiger fans out there, here's a cloth map of the whole world of Orb, which was the world that Talisman of Death was set in, and also the world of Way of the Tiger. A sort of mix, kind of like ninjas in Middle Earth, I suppose you would call Way of the Tiger.
I loved Way of the Tiger. I actually liked it more out of all of the fantasy role-playing game books. That one was my favorite because it was a continuous story. For one thing, the only other book series that did that was Lone Wolf, which I love those too. But Way of the Tiger, featured martial arts, and I've always been a martial artist from a young age.
Me too, as you can see. I command many martial artists to kill for me.
Jamie's
sumo, I can still. I do the sumo diet. I just don't do the sumo exercise.
And you're studying Drunken Master, but you're starting with the drunken part.
Yes, yeah. I do very well at Drunken Master, but perhaps a little too drunk and not enough master.
You bought him a big thing of whiskey for his birthday, didn't you?
Oh yeah. When I was 60, Dave organised a wit round, and they all bought me up from my mates and bought me a bottle of £275 whiskey called Springbank, £6 a sip. And it was cracking whiskey. It was really good. All gone now, sadly. Yeah, all gone.
Sure, can you turn off the voice now, please?
Is it still on?
It's still on. Yes.
Yeah.
My apologies. I'm sorry.
One of the reasons I think that Way of the Tiger...
You can't do the whole show like that, surely.
No.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I think Way of the Tiger was so popular wasn't just because it was back when we did it in the 80s and early 90s. Ninjas were new, so it was a clever new original idea, that combination of Lord of the Rings and ninjas and stuff. But it wasn't really that so much as the world that it was set in, the world of Orc, was my writing partner's D&D world, orb that he'd created with or alignment, D&D, early D&D alignment-driven gods and nations, and you've got all of the different creatures and everything. And a lot of things that happen in the book are things that occur in the background. So there's a scene that come out of the role-playing sessions we had, because he had 3 or 4 different groups of people, friends of Mark's, that played in his world regularly. And we often put events from the D&D campaign into the book, but not as things that you did, that the main character did, yourself in a game book, but that happened incidentally in the background. So there was a scene where my character in Mark's world goes into the town of Doomover, and he insults the general of the Legion of Doom, Honoric himself, and my character was like second level or something. He just chops off my character's head in front of the temple, and we have that occurring in the background as you pass through the city. So it gave this sense, by putting all those things in it, of other characters appearing incidentally, and the things that happen to them happen in the background. It gave the world a feeling of being a living, breathing world. And I think that made it more immersive for people. And we were able to do that because all these stories have been created by role players.
Yeah, that Cassandra and Tyutchev were pretty prominent throughout that and Talisman of Death.
Yeah. Tyutchev now lives in Laos, with his wife and kids, where he does IT or something. Olvar the Barbarian is a publisher in England.
Olvar the Barbarian, I remember that.
Yeah.
I have a confession, Jamie. I loved Way of the Tiger so much that when I ran my first homebrew D&D world, I actually called it Orb in tribute. So
fair enough. Tribute is good. I like tribute. Send me tacos.
Oh, you bet. Salsa.
Or burgers. Some nice, decent burgers.
Southwest.
You can keep your American beer.
It's like making love in a canoe.
I couldn't even fit in a canoe, and then make love in it.
Well, Games Workshop started back in 1975. When did you guys get into it?
Well, I started working there in 1980 something on White Dwarf magazine. And as an assistant editor. And one of the first things I did was get Dave to write loads of stuff, because he was good, and most of them were. Well, you've got a lot of kids writing in with their like one-footed monster and silly ideas and stuff, and so we often had to rely on a continual set of contributors. And in those days, of course, it was the science fiction and fantasy games magazine. So we had RuneQuest and Dungeons and Dragons and Top Secret and Bushido and a whole bunch of different things that we did Traveller articles for. And that was really interesting because it was a great period of growth, of explosion of the whole hobby that D&D had started. So I remember getting my white box of D&D in 1975 or whatever. And that literally, little thing that was sent from the States changed my life. People may look down a little on D&D, but still, I loved it. And Dave wrote a whole bunch of stuff. He used to come in at 10 a.m. and have his nip of vodka in the office. Those were the days.
Yeah.
Now he's given up drink due to
eventually catches that. I think I've had all the drink I was allowed in one lifetime. That's what's happened there. But quite a lot of it before the age of 25. And the menthol cigarettes I used to smoke, they're not even legal over here anymore.
Yeah.
And I used to make the cigarettes, I'd empty them out. I think I'm allowed to say this now. I used to empty them out and then pack little bits of resin, a little bit of the tobacco, a little bit of resin, then snip the filter so I could have a menthol flavored joint. But I had to remember which were the joints and which were the real cigarettes. Obviously.
Probably all right for in Colorado, but I think in Texas they'll hang you.
Well, they'd hang me in Texas anyway.
Or gun you down in the street.
Yeah.
Dark you are.
No, it's hemp. I was going to make rope. No.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Grim follows that tribute too. I mean, you have like a little nip from something from south of France or something.
Yeah, my dad lives in the south of France, next to vineyards, and
cool.
next to the vines they grow like apricots and other fruit to draw all the pests away from the vines.
Wow.
So a lot of people out there have garage stills where they make their own spirits eau de vie of what's there.
Stuff, right?
And he gives me some sometimes. So
I've got a little flask like that says Dark Lord on
it. And doesn't the apricot brandy make more money than the wine?
You would think, but apparently not. Yeah, it's not quite legal. So the French don't seem to care too much.
No.
But when I started on White Dwarf magazine, since then, of course, it's become just a Warhammer catalogue. But that was also working with Ian Livingston and Steve Jackson. So me and other workshop employees would often be given early manuscripts of their game books to look over and check for them and play through and stuff. And so when and working at workshop in those days was Joe Deaver, me, Gary Chalk, a guy called John Sutherland, who did a bunch of historical game books, if you might remember, amongst others. And his writing partner, I've forgotten the name of now, sadly, Farrell, I think, and me. And Dave was often coming into the White Dwarf office to discuss the scenarios he was writing. So that just meant I happened to be in the right place at the right time, but perhaps I was in the wrong place at the right time, because
perhaps you were the John W. Campbell Jr. of gaming.
Yes. So, but then of course, when Fighting Fantasy took off and was massive, I could walk in with Mark or Dave or whatever. People offer us money on the spot because there were hardly any people in the country who knew how they worked, and we were a handful of us. And now everyone worked it out. It's nothing, but at the time, we were in great demand. So just had to start our own stuff, and sadly we did too many different things. I should have concentrated perhaps on the time, or I should have become an accountant and I'd be retired by now, because the book sold really well, but then computers came along and the books didn't sell anymore.
Kids, if you're listening, become a plumber. You can retire at 45 if you're a plumber.
Yeah.
Don't follow your dream though, because that's a disaster. You'll never make any money.
Well, unlikely to see any major differences in plumbing, aren't we? So.
And don't become a history teacher.
Well, I wish I could retire with a pension. Yeah, if I became a history teacher, that would have been great. I'd have been good at that.
Oh my gosh. Grim, you have some questions?
I have a question. So you talked about working for Games Workshop, and you mentioned White Box D&D. I'm always curious to ask people from any generation of gamers, really, how they got into gaming. So for me, it was via fantasy and science fiction and choose your own adventure books, a variety of them. I would read them out to a friend and he would make the choices. So we were kind of role-playing before we knew what role-playing was. But I was curious what your route into gaming was, whether you were into board games or card games beforehand.
Well, Dave was created by an insane wizard.
Strangely,
it was a kind of homunculus that murdered his master.
I'd run a role-playing game at primary school. This is years before Dungeons and Dragons. And of all things, and this is very surprising, it was a soccer-based role-playing game in which the players were running football teams. Now, I say it's strange because I know nothing whatsoever about football and I have less interest. But the kids at school liked it, and I liked the concept of make-believe being structured into a story. So we would actually kick a piece of rolled-up paper around the lounge, and that would determine the write-up for the session as to which team was going through. I think the only thing I knew about football pools and all of that stuff was that they used to read out the football results before Doctor Who came on. So hypnotically, you would get used to listening. I had at least the vaguest idea that there were divisions in football and that you could move between them depending on how well you played the game. So that's my knowledge.
Things like Manchester City 1, Liverpool 2.
That. So
it's
and you were waiting for that
it?
to pass so you could watch Doctor Who. Get out of the way. I want to watch probably William Hartnell, I suppose.
When 10 years later or whatever it was, they came up with Dungeons and Dragons, it was kind of like, actually my introduction was really Empire of the Battle Throne. I was never that interested in in those days, in the Tolkien-esque area of fantasy, I was more into planet stories and Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So Empire of the Petal Throne exactly hit my sweet spot. And
should you explain what that is, Empire of the Petal Throne?
Yeah, it's basically there's a planet. Where do you start?
That's the problem.
There's a planet which was colonized as a pleasure planet by humanity in the distant future, and they kind of either exterminated or reduced to little reservations all of the indigenous hostile life forms, and then some kind of space-time warp plunged that solar system into its own little pocket universe. So there are no stars in the sky or anything. They gradually lost their technology. So it's become 20, 30,000 years later, an ancient world culture with remnants of incredible technology that's left over that nobody really understands and they think of as magic. And the hostile creatures have all made a comeback. And so it's a kind of, and what I like is that it doesn't have, I mean, I'm not against, obviously, because things like Dragon Warriors use folkloric fantasy, but Empire of the Petal Throne is set in a real world in the sense that it's not a story world. Things don't happen because they're right for the arc, and creatures aren't evil because they are intrinsically built to be evil. They don't have that folkloric quality. It's simply as if here is a real world and stuff will happen in it. It's as indifferent to your existence as this real world is, which I think creates brilliant stories, because there's no sense that there's going to be a get out of jail free because I did the right thing and my arc will keep me alive. It's like if I personally, Dave, went and climbed a mountain, it doesn't matter whether my arc wanted me to die. Gravity will see whether I die or not. So it's that kind of a universe, and that also is.
It's also incredibly rich lore and background, because the guy who wrote it was an anthropologist, and there's all sorts of influences from Aztecs to Indonesians, Sufis to. I suppose there isn't much Western stuff in it, and it's made it really exotic and interesting. And it's really hard to.
M.A.R. Barker, wasn't it?
Yeah.
M.A.R. Barker.
And it's just so much stuff with all these. He's even created it. It's Tolkien-esque in that sense. He created his own languages, and there are dictionaries you can get.
Sub-creation.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and you wrote Tirikilu for it.
Yes, and also did a fanzine called The Eye of All-Seeing Wonder. A friend of mine said, when I did that was in the mid-90s, Dave has wisely used a professional career as a springboard into fandom.
Well, I don't know there's much of a difference anymore, really.
No.
Anyway, to be fair.
There seemed to be maybe then. Yeah. But yes, so Tirikilu was, because they keep releasing fairly crap systems to go with Tekamel. The original one was sort of modified D&D, but it didn't really fit the world very well. And they haven't got better. They probably got worse on the whole. So I used to write to Professor Barker when I was at college, and he would tantalizingly send little snippets of how his game system would work. Just things like, we roll a D10, and depending on how much skill you've got in the weapon, that will determine damage. And I was noting all these things, excitedly waiting for his game system. When the game system came along, it was incomprehensibly gnarly and complicated. So I thought,
Swords and
yes, and it was just hundreds of pages with spells, all those kind of abbreviations like HBT or whatever was height build something. Or anyway, it was horrible. And he said, "Oh, we don't use that. We just roll dice." And I thought, no, that's not good enough. I want a system, because my view is that the rules are a court of appeal to prevent the referee from being a dictator. And they must, therefore, they don't have to be complicated, but they must be something that any player can go, I appeal to the rules. And it shouldn't just be, I roll the dice and go, oh, I've decided you did okay. You know, that's... So I wanted a nice, simple system. So Tirikilu, I think, gets it all down to 50 pages. And it's built on what Barker was telling me in the letters. It was the game system he should have been designing, but he wasn't.
Grim has a little bit of experience with complex systems. He started out with Rollmaster, didn't he?
Oh, blimey.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, Middle-earth role-playing was my first proper RPG system after the Fighting Fantasy introductory adventure game. So it's not quite as bad as full on Rollmaster, but it was
Did you ever come across something called Chivalry and Sorcery?
Oh yeah,
I haven't played it.
I remember looking at the huge fat rule book of that, and then I found a set of rules on dice rolling on how to make your own campfire.
Yes.
That's like, what the?
And I actually remember seeing a game. I don't think I ever played Chivalry and Sorcery, but I did see a game. We used to play at college in some rooms, sort of lecture rooms at one of the colleges, and so there was the Tirakalu group, and there was the big room was the D&D people, and then there was a room that had the Chivalry and Sorcery people. And I went in to borrow the powdered milk because we lived in luxury in those days, and as I was going in, the GM was saying, "You open the two of you are at the sarcophagus, and one of you's at the door." And I went back, made the coffee, and about 15 or 20 minutes later, I went back in. And he said, "Two of you are now next to the sarcophagus, and the lid is halfway off." 15 minutes had been taken to do that.
God, it was complicated.
And that's not even combat.
Not even getting to
usually
combat.
the time sink. Yeah.
Oh Lord,
different skills. Cool.
I still have an old boxed copy of Cyborg Commando somewhere that was written by Gary Gygax, and oh my gosh. You could audibly hear me face palming here and how difficult that system was. It was ridiculous. And I was trying to do it as a high schooler. I mean, and then we had the cheesiness of Rifts.
Rifts?
Oh, yeah. The Kevin CMB imprint. He started out with Robotech, and then it eventually... Well, actually, he started out with Palladium role-playing system.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was he got the Robotech license, so he put out a lot of Robotech stuff. So we got in on the Robotech stuff.
Robotech, God.
Right.
That's a long time ago.
And then my friend got Rifts, and we started doing Rifts, and that is the most bonkers game. Oh,
I think the most complicated role-playing book I've ever gone through was Fire Fusion and Steel for Travel a New Era, which is supposed to let you make up any kind of equipment or spaceship or whatever using real-world equations and so on, so it would all pan out. But the process of making anything was incredibly lengthy. The system itself wasn't granular enough that a lot of these decisions would make any difference whatsoever, and random equations throughout the book were wrong. So not helpful.
Sounds a bit like GURPS, which is I find too complicated as well. Well, it's not really complicated, but you have to do too much dice rolling, and there's too many stats. The one that I enjoyed a lot recently was the Apocalypse system. Is that it?
The Icelanders. I don't know what generally they're like, but Sagas of the Icelanders was really good. Yeah,
I
mean, because the thing with Powered by the Apocalypse, it's all going to come down to what you put onto these play sheets, and I'm slightly dubious about those because it's all about special casing, and I hate that in rules because I know you only have to remember what's on your sheet, but there can be this tendency to think you've got to do everything that's on the sheet at some point. But they kept it very, very simple. And in order to run it...
did suit the Icelanders, didn't it?
Yeah, because I was reading all the sagas in parallel with running the game, and it perfectly replicates what happens in the sagas. So Gregor Vuga, I think, designed that, and he did a really good job. But we haven't played any other Powered by the Apocalypse. I can't say in general that they're any good.
I'm not a fan, but I'll spare you my rant.
Well, you see, I'd have the same rant, I suspect. That's the thing. I in general would have a lot of bad things to say, but Sagas it seems to avoid a lot of that. I don't know.
I find Dungeon World to be the best iteration of Powered by the Apocalypse because it's the closest to a normal role-playing game in how you go about doing things, which is why most Apocalypse fans don't like that one. So.
And there's a description online of somebody sort of saying this is the vanilla system, and what they describe would be that it's a perfectly good role-playing game, but that's not actually what comes. I mean, I actually find the willful obfuscation in a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse really irritating. Where they'll use a term, not define it, and keep using it. Just fuck off. So they
no measure
they
response.
So they kind of invite that, I think, but.
Yeah.
anyway, the Icelanders is a good one, so I'm not tarring it with that same brush.
Well, when I started discovering, to go back a moment whilst I remember it, I forget, because Livingston and Jackson recently have been working on a history of Games Workshops. They asked me to do a lot of research for them. And through all of the papers they gave me and stuff, I found the original advert for a role-playing game that Steve Jackson had written. And it was a short little pamphlet. And that's how things were done in those days, a printed pamphlet. I mean, describe a D&D session. You know, like you went to the room and they're all to the corner. And these pamphlets were posted out to people and mail order. And I got my hands on one when I was like 14. And that's what made me order the white box of D&D. And it was wonderful all the years later to find this, the original thing that I discovered in a bookshop, because I was wandering around all the, you know, I was a 14-year-old kid reading Conan instead of Shakespeare, complaining that they were making us read Jane Austen instead of Sven Hassel and the SS Penal Battalion on the Eastern Front getting their legs blown apart by mines, or Conan cutting the throats of pirates on the high seas, or Elric of Melnibone drinking the souls of the innocent with Stormbringer. But no,
now this is important. You say Melnibone or Melnibone?
I used to say Melnibone. Now I say Melnibone.
I've always said Melnibone.
Oh,
typical Texan exceptionalism.
Actually, it's
Melnibone.
I think it's the Spanish pronunciation. I'm Hispanic,
okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
my brain always half confuses it with Marylebone.
Yeah,
in London. So
right.
I wonder if Murkoff wrote it there. Yeah, did he write it?
Well, Coram Fields was Coram, right? Because he was banging these bloody things out 2 books a weekend in Bloomsbury for his agent at his agent's flat. So yeah.
And then I remember reading that first D&D thing, and we're talking about simple or complex. It's not very complicated. When you look at it now as a rule system, it's really bizarre. But actually, at the time, it was completely original and new, and nobody had done anything. I mean, I played a bunch of SBI board games and war games and Lord of the Rings, and read all of the fantasy you could get at the time. But it was completely new, and just reading those first books, Men and Magic, Myth and Men and Magic, Monsters and Mayhem, and the Monster Manual, which came later. So there was this little cheap printed books, and they were just unbelievably exciting and completely changed every view of what you could do. The enormous open-ended sort of potential of it all, where you could go with it. It was just great. Probably it made no sense, of course. But borrowing bits and pieces from, Zeus would bump into, I don't know, Thor and stuff like that.
I was going to say, Jamie,
with a bunch of orcs.
I ran across something for Unbound books. It's called Dice Men, Games Workshop. The early years.
That's it. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was doing it, and they're finishing it off, and I did a lot of research into that, which was really interesting because there's one bit that you might enjoy, which was them telling Ian and Steve for a while they finally managed to rent a shop out, but they couldn't live in a flat. Rent a flat and the shop, the first ever Games Workshop. Now there's like 480 and it's worth billions. So they lived in the back of a van for a while. And before they even got to that, they were living in this flat before then, sorry. And it was like several layers of flat, and there was only one phone in the whole building. And that was a payphone in the hallway. And they wrote to Gary Gygax, and then he rang them, and they had to go down and explain to the landlord they were talking. They had this business discussion. And Ian and Steve said, yes, we have the European distribution rights, which they sort of had. And Gary Gygax went, oh, great, okay, yes, that sounds good, and let's do the deal then. And Ian and Steve made it sound like they were these top European businessmen, but they were in a hallway in a rundown part of Olympia in London. They couldn't afford to fix the roof in the flat that they rented. And the amazing thing later, when they finally met Gary Gygax was in his bedroom in America with his last 4 copies of D&D. And he was desperate to get it into Europe. And so they got the license Games Workshop for a while for Dungeons and Dragons, and then it all took off and went mad, and TSR opened in the UK and stuff. But this is a lovely little story about how both of them are trying to pretend that they've got offices and all that, and they're just starting off. It's great.
It makes it sound like role-playing in the UK was launched by the young ones.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of true. You know, they were very fit when they were living in the back of the van because they would have to go to the squash club to have showers and things.
That's not like you young
and
ones
then play
at all.
squash. No, that's true. They did work very hard, to be fair to them, and they did build it.
Well, actually, I noticed on this, though, that you're going to get to have, Italian dinner at a top Italian restaurant in London with Ian and Steve.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening now. That's not sure if I'm involved in that anymore, to be fair, but someone will with Ian and Steve anyway. I probably won't be.
Well, the pre-orders are still open, so.
Are they?
Yeah.
It's been a long time. I mean, I gave a bunch of stuff and they're just finishing off.
Maybe once the
stories
plague
of
is over.
the stories of them in America and things like that, sorts of things they got up to.
Well, I got
the real luxury option would be to have I don't know, a bowl of something in Ian's kitchen, wouldn't it? That would be better than be more plush than any Italian restaurant you could find.
Well, he's got a lovely house in Richmond, yeah, and I did have some fish and chips in his kitchen.
God, you
we'd always
devil.
Yeah. Well, I've sort of worked for him at Workshop, and then I worked for him at Idols. And every now and again, we'd go off and have lunches of local fish chips and mushy peas. And then I wrote all these Dark Lord children's books, which I may as well put up here in the hope that someone buys them for their middle school children. Thank you, John.
We call that pimping.
Pimping, yes. I'll pimp my kids' book, unfortunate phraseology. But anyway, so there was a series of those, about 4. And what was I going to say? What's that got to do with anything? I forgot.
You might sell a book. So
Sell a book?
Yes, might sell a book. Yeah. What was it? Something to do with the interviews. God. Oh yeah, I do lots of school visits. So one of the things I do lots of school visits with the Dark Lord Travelling Roadshow, and I do like children's writing courses where we do workshops for creative writing for kids. And I went to Ian Livingstone's school without realising. I walked in, there was pictures of him all over the wall, and the headmaster said it was I've forgotten the name of it now. Something grammar.
Altrincham Grammar.
Altrincham Grammar, that's it. And I ended up going there and being weirded out by Ian on the wall because he's their star pupil.
The most impressive thing about that story is he's their most famous old boy.
Yes, yeah. And he didn't actually do that well at school.
My most famous old boy was Terry Jones, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That definitely wins.
That's proper. Yeah, that wins.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah.
Well, my school, I got beaten a lot in those days in the 70s. I got caned with a cane, and I was about to be expelled, and I left before I got expelled, which is a term for being thrown out of school for being a bad boy. And it wasn't that bad, just a bit misbehaved. But years later, my Dark Lord book, the first one, won the Roald Dahl Funny Prize, which is quite a prestigious prize in England. And suddenly they were going around, "Oh, Jamie Thomson is one of our famous alumni. Please come and talk." And to go to the school and talk. Yeah, that bloke over there who's retired now, he hit me with a stick many times. And not say that to the kids. Also, get expelled from my school and you will do well.
Gentlemen, we got a question from the chat. This one actually, I think we could all field this one right here. It's like, what do people think is a good example of complexity in RPGs? E.g., I think D&D 5th edition is great for beginners, but I think it's too streamlined for more advanced players without house ruling. I don't really care for 5th edition. If you want to talk complexity with just a decent system, I'd say probably Pathfinder, because there are so many character options that you can literally build the kind of character that you want. Grim?
I think it's best to start with something simple, and then you can house rule in by precedent, any extra complexity that you particularly need. Since Dave is here, I'll kiss his ass and say that Dragon Warriors is an excellent starting RPG, and the way it used to be structured through the different books, you would build complexity and add options as you went on. So I think that's a good way of doing it. There's so many open systems now. I'd say find a system that you like and then figure it out from there.
Mm-hmm.
Dave?
I've been doing it's not really a sequel to Dragon Warriors. It's set in the same world, but a game called Jewel Spider that I've been tinkering with. And I started with, I think, 8 different categories of ability. So you might have strength and grace and things like, but basically things like, can I climb a wall? Can I charm the guard? Can I do something, can I roll the boulder? And I started to think, do I need 8? 4 could do, because what I really wanted to do was to have a really simple core system, so that basically, as you're, after all, what you're having a conversation around the table, and you just say, I want to do this. You go, okay, well, how many categories of this are there? So let's say there are 8. But then you want the frills. And what I wanted was a system that allowed those frills to be added if you had them on the sheet and you wanted to have them. But if you were a player that didn't want them, you didn't have to have them. It wasn't like if you said to somebody, you're going to hit him with the sword, what's your sword skill? If the player goes, I haven't got anything, I'm like, okay, just use your basic, strength or whatever. But if the player has bothered to spend points in sword, then they can add those, but they're not essential for you to play. They're just, they basically grow into place as required and then fall away when you don't need them. So I think a system that can expand, like one of my builders had this little ladder, and it was like a magic item because he carried it under his arm. When he extended it, it went up sort of 30 feet. And he went up this thing. And I thought, okay, that's like the set of rules. It should be a little thing until you need it to be bigger. And then it will be as big as you need it to be. And then it'll go back to being a little contained thing. And because most of the time, what's really good about a game isn't going to be in the rules, is it? It's going to be the people around the table and the world you're in and the way it's being run and the stories that emerge. And what you want is something that doesn't get in the way of those. And as I said earlier, that can be a court of appeal so that you don't just feel, I'm just being told a story arbitrarily. So that would be my criteria.
Wow. Jamie?
I haven't played 5e or D&D for a long time. I played a bit of Pathfinder on the computer game version. I didn't like it much because it gave me a bunch of characters I didn't like. The usual Scottish dwarf. My dwarves are always Scottish.
Dwarves should be Welsh.
Should be Welsh.
Unintelligible.
Or should they have accents at all? But anyway, so a lot of rule systems, it's like GURPS, annoys me because I don't need to be told. I resent being told that my character has a limp now, or that he's going to be scared of. He's had a psychological reaction. He's now scared of the dark. I want to role play that, and that's what I really enjoy about role playing. So if my character's going to go slightly mad, I'll play him going mad. I don't need a rule. It's similar with alignments. I didn't really need. I quite liked the D&D alignment system because it made things easy. But after a while, you don't need to be told that your paladin is falling into darkness and you've lost your paladin powers. I'll play that. That's what I really like about the apocalypse system. It's really simple. The rules don't get in the way, and it's about the role playing for me. And if I'm going to play a one-handed guy, I'll play a one-handed guy. You probably do need rules for that for combat. But having said that, I remember that Dave's Tiracali system was quite simple, but because I played this kind of, martial artsy kung fu character, and he was obsessed with the martial arts. So I became obsessed with the rule system and trying to completely exploit or use anything that I could to make it work. But that kind of was still like the character would do that if he was playing a game. And it was also a testament to Dave's rule writing that the game was simple, the rules were simple, but actually there was quite a bit of complexity that you could coax out of them.
And actually, that's a good example, because in Tiracali originally, I had this idea that you would have a combat stat, and that you would, originally it was going to be, you could put a certain amount into attack, a certain amount into defense. And then I, for some reason, thought, rather than just, keep, because people around the table sometimes, they don't want to subtract numbers or whatever. So I said, okay, what you'll have is, we'll do it as blocks of half. So you've got, let's say you've got a skill of 16. You can do 2 half attacks, 2 half parries, a half attack, a half parry. So each with a skill of 8. And what we found was that gave us an enormous degree of kind of narrative emergence. And that if I had made it, you could go to 12 on attack and then you'd be left with 4 in defense, it would have been a lot more faff for no extra benefit.
But this guy that I played was this martial arts bloke, so I would pore over every little move, every action. And then there was another guy I played called Baron Javak, and he was a very high level, became a very high level, powerful demonologist in this world. And there was this book of Ebon Bindings, which was full of spells and demon stuff. And I wrote a thing that Barker actually in the EPT world had a look at, which was all about the symbology of the demons. And that character, and also me playing it, wasn't interested in half attacks and enormously complex tactical battles. It was just all about what is the right law and have I got the summoning correct and that kind of thing, and what's the sacrifice I must make to the evil dark demons to pull off such and such. And that was much more role play, and that's I want a system that lets me play the character and doesn't tell me how to play it.
And we have a kind of a guest out in here in the audience from Netherborn Games. We have Anthony. He's talking about liking quick systems at this stage. Anthony actually wrote the Any World system, which just got kickstarted last month, and glad he's in the audience. He's having a bit of a rough time with the COOF right now, but I'm glad you're with us, Anthony. And wow, well, kind of pulling things into game books, and I'm not pulling anything away. If you guys want to jump on something, I know you guys will. But I want to talk about Fable Lands real quick because to me, there has been, over the last few years, like a resurgence in the game books. And I guess it's because old guys like us, like in our 40s and stuff like that, who grew up reading these books, are finding them again. And they're,
and you have money.
Yeah, we have a little bit of money. And
give me your money, Wormling.
Hey, I did. Oh, I'm going to mention this.
Give me more money.
But the Fighting Fantasy books command some really huge prices on eBay right now. But the thing that made me happy was the fact that because I loved Way of the Tiger so much, but Jamie stopped at 5 at Inferno, and it left in a cliffhanger, and I was like, it's 6? Yeah, at Inferno. And it was, here I am, I'm like, I guess I'm like 15 at the time, because it's, he brought like one out every few months, every year. Yeah,
I'm sorry about that. We actually just got burnt out. We did a whole bunch of, we did 6 Vulcan books, we did 6 Where the Tigers, 3 Fighting Fantasies, a Crystal Maze game book, and 4 2-player game books, all in like 3 or 4 years. It just completely drained us. And what we should have done was just done 12 Where the Tiger books.
Yeah. I would have loved it. But
we would have to have done all this other stuff. But then in those days, they all wanted game books, so that they were just giving you money to write the damn things. So it was God.
But what I loved about it was the fact that having rediscovered it, and you guys, you had come up with the prequel to Way of the Tiger and the finale, Redeemer.
So there's now 8 of them, isn't there? Book 0 to book, and then book 7, And we fixed book 6 because that had a bunch of flowchart errors and other things. So it's all nice and seamless now.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I reacquired all the books, and I played through the game, and I finally finished and got completion for the whole Way of the Tiger series a few years ago, and I was so happy. Thank you very much. But in the process,
a pleasure for you.
It was. I also discovered the Blood Sword series by Dave.
We don't need to talk about them. Worthless pieces of trash.
Oh man!
And talk to him about Blood Sword.
I love that because Dave kind of threw me for a loop in one of them. I confess I kind of cheated my way through Blood Sword a little bit. Okay. I wouldn't play through the combats because I was kind of like, I don't really want to play the combats because it's all dice rolling. I really just want to advance the story, make the choices, and we'll just pretend I win all the combats. However, I got to one combat and it was just like, it was insane because you're having to fight all these gods and stuff, and it's just kind of like, oh my god, how am I supposed to win? How would I win this if I was rolling dice? Yeah. So I played through it as like normal, thinking, okay, fine, I win the combat, doesn't matter, they're gods. And then it was just like the game ended suddenly because you weren't supposed to do that. And I remember posting to Dave. I was like, Dave, what are you supposed to do? I won the battle, but I can't go anywhere. He's, well, you weren't supposed to fight.
When facing a god, don't think you're going to beat it that way. In fact, that was why Professor Barker did Tekamel. He went along to a game at the university, and he said the guy running it had them fighting, I don't know, an archangel. And he was saying, okay, how many hit dice are you going to give Jesus then? You know, it makes no sense. And he wanted it to feel like, you know, you're a little dot in the world, and there are some things you can fight, but some things you can't. And those actually, they're not even gods, are they? The Caesarian explains they're kind of reflections of gods on the mythic plane or something. His nerdy explanation of the magic, but they're way beyond what the players can deal with, and the solution is not to try to take them on head to head. But it was kind of like I wanted to see what D&D, you know, the D&D combat monster type players would try and do. And running away was the best solution to that one, because there's a solution, but not direct confrontation.
Yeah. Well, and you finished that series, because I kickstarted the last book, and when you sent the package to me with the book, I actually still have the envelope, because I officially have Dave Morris's signature now on a document.
Burn it before your house just opens up into a plane to Cthulhu. That's what Dave Morris's signature does. It attracts interplanar deities and unpleasant creatures from that.
That would be such a useful.
There'll be a Shoggoth on your roof before you know it.
It's spelled
that's a musical,
but it's pronounced Dave Morris.
Yes, but it's written Nyarlathotep.
That was too. Nyarlathotep was too difficult to say, so just change it to Dave in the end.
Yes,
Yog Sothoth. Got a couple of questions in the chat, but really quick, I was leading into this. I got into Fabled Lands shortly thereafter, and that amazed me, because it was kind of like it's an additive book series, and it never ends, and I love that.
Well, Dave and I played part of it. It was Dave and I played Clouds of Zine and Dark Side of Zine.
Oh yeah,
which is very early Might and Magic thing. And in that, it was this huge world you could wander around. You could build your own castle and live in it and stuff like that. And also, I'd done a radio play with my brother for the BBC, which was set in the proto Fabled Lands world. And so, combining those two ideas, and we'd already, we've done so many any kind of game book you could possibly think of, from fighting fantasy to 2-player to multiplayer blood sword to single narrative ninjas martial arts. We'd become specialists in game books, and there was a natural progression for us to start thinking about how we could make it like a computer game. So it was a vast open world, and you can travel between books. So paragraph 55, and one of the books might say, if you want to travel to the land of Golnir, get this boat, and turn to paragraph 114 in book 2. And they all linked up with all these adventures crossing over, and we used the system of code words. Because the other thing we wanted to do was have an open world in book form that you could change as the player. So the code word might say, if you have the code word slaughter, the next time you kill an entire goblin village, say, next time you go there, you find the dead bodies of the goblins everywhere, and the book recognizes that you've changed the world. And then there are the ghosts of the shaman goblins who pursue you, waiting for you, that kind of thing. Or you can overthrow the king, or side with the rebels in a civil war in one thing. We were able to use a system to record those events so that the world is changed and recognizes what you've done. So when you're level 1, it might say, "Greetings, wormling." When you're level 10, you may go, "Welcome, my lord," the characters that you meet. And it became very, very complicated, but we were able to do it in those days. We're just doing another series of open world books. And I've got some old school flow charts here. Can you see them?
Yeah,
I think
upside down.
That was Grimm's question.
I was going to ask at one point, and it's like, how do you
Dave's,
do it?
of course, are much neater and less, that's the way, much neater than mine.
I don't do the flowchart until after I finish. I keep it in my head, and then I'll flowchart it after.
Can't do that
to check
anymore.
I got it right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean.
I make the
I was
flowchart
imagining
first.
one of those sort of conspiracy theorist walk boards with pins and strings.
I mean,
Dave's is a bit more like that.
I've got what have I got here? That's this. So that's, but you see, that's not really a flowchart. I've just done a map of a town and I put some locations, and then I'll actually write the flow. I'll keep the flowchart in my head, but I needed the geographic layout just to keep me.
So you don't use software for it. You stay very old school.
No.
We can't see how this.
We were working with a lot of people, but because we're doing them on our own, it isn't really worth. If you were passing chunks to a bunch of writers, I think you'd have to use the software option. But it's just.
It would actually be more hassle to do it.
Yeah, it probably would for just one person.
Dropping and dragging.
I was
circles
just going to say also
trying to write in them and create a text box and move it about the screen. Just stick it on a piece of paper.
Going back to the idea of the open world thing, we'd actually pitched that to Puffin. The idea of an Arthurian open world book in the 80s, because I was mainly interested in game books as a gateway to role playing, and I assumed most people would play them for that purpose, and so a lot of stuff in the Bloodsword books was stuff that characters who were in my role playing games, the Dragon Warriors games, and so we thought in our role playing games there's no little old man runs into a pub and gives you a mission. It's always players define their own. They'd say something like, "What's this on the map? Let's go there," and they'd put their own expeditions together. So we thought, let's create a game book that lets you basically have an ongoing campaign, and we pitched that to Puffin as a Arthurian thing. But I suppose they were already having enough success with Fighting Fantasy. They didn't really want another one.
It's that kind of, you're saying earlier, people just throwing money at you at one point because game books were so popular. Was that how you got the deal with Corgi to do Dragon Warriors? Did they really understand what they were getting?
That was me smuggling something in, really, because I thought for a long time I'd wanted to put what would have been the system that became Dragon Warriors. I wanted to put it into White Dwarf, but Jamie at the time had been saying, it would be like six pages and it would be too much. So I'd had it sitting there in note form, and then I thought, I can smuggle this. They all want game books, so I'll tell them what you want to do is role playing. And I also thought, all these D&D books, they were like a tenner each, and I thought this will be $1.75, I think it was at the time. So it's pocket money for kids to go and buy it in a bookshop rather than having to go and find a specialist hobby shop. So it was me using the game book craze to smuggle my own interests in there. And Corgi because they also at the same time said, we're going to buy, they did get into it then. They said, right, we're going to buy Schwarzer Auge, the Dark Eye, and we're also going to buy all of the Tunnels and Trolls stuff. And it was like, I was saying, look, just pick a role-playing system. It's fine that you're doing role-playing. What's the point of doing getting a load of role-playing stuff and just throwing it at the wall? So anyway, they sort of, I don't think they really understood it much, but anyway, it enabled me to get Dragon Warriors out there, so I was happy.
The follow-up, do you think that format, the paperback format, is still viable and a good way to get games out?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I was listening to, I think it was one of the Grognard podcasts, and they were saying, why didn't Dave and Oliver release it as a deluxe hardback for 25 quid or something at the time? It's like, well, nobody would have bought the bloody thing and it wouldn't have been in a bookshop.
In those days,
It had to be where you would go and find a game book, so that if you were buying game books, you'd go, what's this then? And I think Tim Harford was saying he thought he brought it home thinking it was a game book, and then thought, I have to play this with other people, and got started that way. So, I mean, I liked that approach, and it meant that I could do little bits and build it up as it felt like it was building a series, whereas now I sit and think, I've got to think of everything from day one, because it's all got to be in one big book. But could you get into it? I mean, the paperback thing was, and I was commenting on this on Twitter because I was sorting out a load of books, just because the house has become a repository for books now, and the people are secondary. And
same problem.
I looked at all my books from the 70s and thought, these are paperbacks that you could slip in your pocket. You know, they were Dragon Warriors size. Nowadays, paperbacks are bloody great things. And I thought old paperbacks were the size of a modern phone, which was a good size to carry around, right? And so I liked that as a format, but I don't know where it would fit in the modern world, I guess.
Yeah, all my old science fiction from the 60s through the 80s is all that size, and you've got short story collections and things that you don't get so much anymore. Something's changed.
Clark Ashton Smith.
Well, because I realized I was going to go and get on a train. Obviously not recently, I wouldn't get on a train now, but I was going to slip a book in my pocket. I thought, this damn thing, you know, it's far too big, a modern paperback. And then, of course, my wife said, well, most people getting on a train who want to read a book will read it on their phone. They won't expect it to be a block of paper. So it's just me being behind the times there.
Well, I don't know. I like the physical tactile sensation of having an actual
Jamie loves
book.
smelling books.
Me too.
Every time I give Jamie a book, the first thing he does is sniff it.
I love the smell of old books.
I'm with you.
I must admit, even though I'm about to put
Useful
out a big 500-page block of a book, these days when I get a new role-playing game and it's 500 pages, I kind of groan slightly.
Yeah. So we were given a copy of Zweihänder, and you could kill a cat by dropping Zweihänder on it.
Yes,
they should put that on the cover because I think it would be a selling point.
Yeah, well, Hero System is famously a very thick book, and they actually proved it could stop a bullet. So,
cool.
Well, and I don't know how useful those are at the table because I don't really want to have to. If you have to turn to the book, you know, and hand it round the table in play, then it's probably over.
I was thinking how useful it would be to have a rule book that could stop a bullet. Well, in most RPG sessions, the poor old DM gets shot.
Depends how bad a GM you are.
Or perhaps if we're in Texas, you need it.
Yeah.
Your players will gun you down if you.
Anyway, I believe that you were given a segue into the Vulcan Verse, which is Jamie's. It's really Jamie's project. So
that's our latest thing
that
we're writing. Yes, another huge open world, but it's all Greek mythology, which has actually been a nice turnaround for us because we've spent so long in Dave writing either folklore stuff or goblins and sub-Tolkien things. It's nice to go back to before D&D came along. That's what the myths were. We were reading Greek myths and Viking myths and that kind of thing. And then D&D took it all, jumbled it all up together, and ended up with Warhammer and sub-Tolkien orcs and goblins. But we don't have any of that at all. It's all twisted takes on Greek mythology. But it's all set in the Vulcan Verse, which is a huge computer game thing that's being developed. A bit like sort of Minecraft meets Warcraft kind of thing.
And it's map there.
Yes, you can't really see that very well.
Well, because I've alphaed it in order to fit my notes on top of it. So
yes,
it's a very good one.
So it's also got lots of sort of cryptocurrency and NFTs going on in it. So you can create these characters and wander around, build your Minecraft world, and also farm for NFTs and this crypto token, which I was given some, and I sold it for made a bit of money, and I don't really know what the hell it was I was selling. But someone gave me money for it, so
I call them Dunning-Kruger rounds.
Yes, yes, Dunning-Kruger rounds. Yeah. But they seem to be real things, and recently they've done a Frazetta NFT through Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer that I've also put into some of these game books, and that might sell for a whole load of money. And it's kind of fun just writing these game books because they want to have it's like a marketing thing for them so that they can get they get the Vulcan Verse onto as many media platforms as possible to term them it. And the idea is that Vulcan has created a virtual Olympus. And I've been writing all the lore and the storylines, which has been fun to compete with man, because man's turned away from the old gods, and he's created a sort of virtual world in which the old titans and gods sleep, and there's various plot lines, and there's basically a vast open world of 4 quadrants: Hades, Arcadia, Boreas, who is the god of the north winds. It's all frozen and icy, and the deserts. That Dave's written the ice and the desert area. The desert's sort of sphinxy, Greco-Egyptian
And by the way, as usual, I wrote the desert one over the winter, and I'm writing the frozen one in the summer.
In the summer,
I wrote Heart of Ice over a summer. It's just, why can it never sync up properly?
Maybe it's better that way because you're yearning for the one.
It could be. It could actually. I did think that, as it was a particularly hot summer when I was writing Heart of Ice. I did think, maybe it helps.
So there'll be books set in each quadrant, and you travel between them. And we've done a lot more interlinking than we did under the Fabled Lands books because we're older and wiser, sort of thing. And it's also much simpler. As someone once said about the Fabled Lands books, they're a bit Nintendo. As were all game books in those days, you die all the time, harshly. And so the Vulcan Verse game books are a bit more Xbox, there's a built-in resurrection kind of thing. And it's a lot more, it's a lot simpler. The rules are simpler, and it's more about exploring the world and traveling between the quadrants. And there's also, unlike in Fabled Lands, there's an overarching single narrative plot line. But mostly it's just a huge open world. And I had so much fun writing Hades. The dark, dismal depths of Tartarus.
I can imagine.
Tortured shades. It's fun. I think Dave's had a lot of fun with a huge undead. Well, it's really the Spartoi. The Spartoi are these Greek dragon's teeth creatures in Greek myth. They would sow the dragon's teeth, and these men would rise up, warriors, out of the sand. In the original Greek myths, they fight with Cadmus and become his companions. Some of them kill each other, and so they become real people, like characters you create in a role-playing game. They move from NPCs to being player characters somehow in the Greek myth. But we've gone very much with the Jason and the Argonauts version, where they sow the dragon's teeth, they turn into skeletal warriors from Hades. And Dave's taken that as reading some of the gory descriptions.
If I can't work politics into a game book, then I revert to my other default, which is to work movie references in. So they are there as Harryhausen. But I think there must be about 50 different movies that get referenced in Notice in various ways. So
also, it's the longest game book you've ever written.
Yes, it's because I'm an idiot. And it should have been about 750 sections long, and it ended up 1,706.
Oh Lord!
Christ.
Yeah, I realised.
Mine. So that's like one book he's done is as big as the two books I've nearly finished.
From January to June, I'd written over 250,000 words of just the books, basically. Oof. So I'll never look at any more Greek myths ever again after this.
Yeah, so
that's it.
It was fun at first. It's been ruined now.
That is the problem in game writing. I think you get turned off the research.
At the beginning, it was really quite hard, but we soon picked it up again. All the old skills, I think. You can't quite do what we used to do. Like I used to be able to hold an entire Fabled Lands book in my head, sort of thing. I can't do that now. I have to compartmentalize.
Yeah. Well, when I wrote the Frankenstein, I did a sort of game book. It's only available on iPhone and iPad, but I did a game book version of Frankenstein, and I was given the markup because they put it into a thing called Inkle Writer, and the guys at Inkle told me the markup that the Inkle Writer system used. So I simply wrote it in Word, sticking the markup in as I was writing, and they said, "Oh, it all compiled." And I said, I didn't do a flowchart or anything. At that point, which was about 10 years ago, I was sufficiently good at this stuff that I could just keep in my head I was the guy in the Matrix who could see the lady in the red dress, right, from the code. But 10 years on, it's a bit harder. I mean, I said I don't bother with flowcharts, but that's not because I'm a Zen master. It's just because I'm lazy and I'm not doing the flowchart first.
You couldn't do it without a flowchart first. But it's actually quite interesting because Dave found lots of logic errors in his books. And in mine, there are no logic errors. They're all typos, lots and lots and lots of typos. But I think it's something to do with the fact that I flowchart them all first.
It might be. It's almost like having a plan.
Just saying, I mean.
Yeah.
So speaking of logic errors and being able to see through the matrix and see all the skein of fate, as it were, could you Brexit?
Well, now that's interesting.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
You could, because you could Norway it, and so I think you can have American listeners may want to tune out now because it's a local debacle of our own. But prior to Brexit, prior to the actual vote, we were asked, would we like to? It was the equivalent of Texas saying, shall we leave the United States?
Oh, I know that question.
Right. I bet that comes up a lot. But imagine it's even stranger. Imagine New York was asked this question. And then somebody said, well, we'll basically create a structure. One of the ways we could do it, we're not suggesting that we would lose the benefits of trade with the rest of the USA. One of the ways we could do it is to have an emulator, in effect, that plugs onto the side but removes some of the responsibilities of being a full member. But the moment we had the vote, which was a very narrow one, as people will recall, it was immediately, of course, the most extreme possible, because it became as soon as you have a kind of doctrinal purpose, as it were, people will start winnowing off the people who aren't pure in doctrine, till we ended up with the people who the doctrine becomes so shaved away that at the very end, nobody knows what they were after, and they don't even understand what they were aiming for. But they just remember that if, for example, you were I'm saying the left wing of the Conservative Party, that's not left wing in any normal sense. It's what most people would consider right wingers, but they were the slightly saner side of the Conservative Party. If those people had said something like, why don't we stick with the single market? It seems to work for Norway, and Switzerland has a kind of emulator for that. They were being told, you are like an actual communist. Get out of this party. So it ended up going very, very badly wrong.
Magnus the Good, yes. I prefer Magnus the Bad, to be honest. But yeah,
Magnus the Moderate, I think. You don't have to
Magnus the Moderate.
Bad.
Don't be ridiculous, moderate. What are you saying? Preposterous.
If any of the Scandinavian states are accepting economic refugees from the UK, I'm there.
Yeah, I'd go there. Yeah.
One good thing that came out of it, I actually haven't. This is my old passport, which is the British one, but I now have a new Irish passport, so I am still an EU member.
Oh, you bastard!
Yeah, and Jamie could get one, but he's too lazy to do it.
I've got the whole envelope with everything I need to apply for it.
Yeah, well, you've got to send it.
I'm daunted by the form that has to be filled in. I have to get things signed by local people to prove that I'm doing it.
You called me your scion. Can you adopt me so that I can get an Irish passport?
I might have to marry you. And Jamie has pointed this out, that I could. I'd have to move to Ireland, and then in order marry. I might have to switch genders or whatever to do this, but in order, I'd have to marry everybody for 1 year, and as long as they remain there for a year, I can send them off with citizenship. Go with God.
I'll marry the next one.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, you could always come to Texas and marry me, and then you could walk around with your AR-15 and your samurai sword strapped to your hip.
Yeah,
AR-15 healthcare. AR-15 healthcare.
Yeah.
I would carry an AR-15.
Bizarrely, doesn't Mike Moorcock live in Texas?
I think he does.
And I would imagine this is a person you could not take out of London, and yet there he is living in Texas. Amazing.
If I was in Texas, I would go around with either a proper Colt 44 or Peacemaker or some. What are the guns that the Saint of Killers has in Preacher?
Oh, those are old Navy Colts.
Navy Colts, that's it. I'd have them. They're wonderful thing. As long as I get proper antique ones.
He lives just outside of Austin in Texas.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a very strange place for Mike Moorcock to end up.
It's not so strange if you've been to Austin. It's a very liberal, kind of laid-back town. It's very wild and wacky and weird.
I think he's always defined himself in opposition to the mainstream. So he's more against the grain in Texas than he would be anywhere else.
Yeah.
Plus, they let him carry his smoking sword around with him.
Oh, yeah. It's a funny
runes.
It's a funny story, but... for the longest time here in Texas, we had a law on the books that we could not carry a knife with a blade that was longer than 6 inches.
Wow.
However, with the all the Second Amendment stuff coming into play, so our law got revised, and now they don't care what you carry. So I can freely walk around my town with my katana, which I am licensed to carry and use as a, card-carrying member of...
The people will say to you, you brought a knife to a gunfight, you fool.
Exactly. That's the problem. Yeah.
Unless it's Stormbringer, in which case you still win.
I don't know. Would you win against an AR-15?
Oh, I believe there's.
It would deflect all of the bullets.
In the Fortress of the Pearl, he's proof against arrows and everything with Stormbringer.
That's true.
You always get one of those old black powder weapons that were both a blade and a gun, and then you got all situations covered.
Yeah.
There you go. They have modern equivalents of those too. They have knives that have like 44 bullets armed in them, so you can shoot somebody with the knife and stab them at the same time. Got some questions here real quick. I want to make sure we get these before anything else. But Anthony from Netherborn, our friend who we had on a few weeks ago, he says, question is, there seems to be a clear divide between old school games and modern games. Do you think there are any good options that appeal to both sides? Honestly, from my perspective, I'm going to say OSR, because the more, I don't know, it just seems like newer rule systems are more needlessly complex. OSR, I kind of think mostly got it right the first time. But Grim?
I fall somewhere in the middle in my taste in games. I like narrative elements in my games, which is what I guess we associate with modern gaming, the more sort of narrative-driven, story-driven sort of games. But I also like, as David said, to appeal to the rules. I see the rules as being like the game world's physics, and ideally the rules and the game world should work together to make the game have the best chance possible of working. So I fall somewhere in between. So something like Powered by the Apocalypse, First Vision, that's too far into narrative territory for me. And then going the other way, something like Rollmaster is too far the other way for me. And I've never been a huge fan of D&D. So the stuff in the middle, stuff like Storyteller, basic role-playing, which is behind RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu and a whole bunch of other stuff. The D6 system that used to power the old West End Games Star Wars system. Those fall nicely in that sort of middle ground for me. So that's what I prefer. And I think that can appeal to both sides without pleasing either of them fully. But
And Dave?
Well, I'm kind of, I don't know about old school and modern, but I think there's been increasingly a tendency to think of games as trying to replicate self-consciously stories. I like people talking about season arcs and all that kind of thing. And I think that's not the best way to get a story, because think of life. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read New Grub Street, but one of the writers in that, Biffin, is trying to get fiction that doesn't feel like it's designed to be fiction, that feels like life. It's an unattainable goal, but it seems like that's really what I'd like a game to be like a parallel reality in which stories happen, but they happen as they happen to us in life, rather than because we talked about or planned some arc, which feels very artificial and very bolted on. And so I don't know if that's old school or modern. But I'm kind of against that approach of self-consciously trying to replicate an art form rather than a parallel reality.
Jamie?
I kind of think the rule system shouldn't really matter. It should be, any rule system will work as long as you've got a good GM and some good players who can role play it. But then I'm more on the narrative side. Having said that, I do like my Power Gaming 2, where it's kind of character I'm playing, or some interesting rules, but not too intrusive. I guess a bit like Grim, I suppose, in between. But really, I want to be able to take my character, and if he gets killed because of it, he gets killed, or she, and play. It should all be about the story and the characters and how the players work together to create a tale or a story. So it should also be that the GM doesn't force you down the rails of a given tale, unless that's the nature of a particular scenario that you're all playing together for whatever reason, more like a co-op sort of, playing a game of Lord of the Rings, say. But in any normal open-ended RPG, when I say normal, what does that mean? It should be about what the players generate, and that the GM gives them the space to do it. And he might throw some leads in, but if the players go off in another direction, the GM goes with them. So the rules don't really matter too much, except in cases like GURPS that it can get in the way. But a good GM will just simplify those bits so you don't have to jump on a horse and make a roll just to make sure you get on the horse, which isn't really a lot of fun.
Exactly. Yeah. Another question we had from Chaz Sexton. This is, do you have any thoughts on how the new generation of players seem to gravitate towards off-culture, race, class, subclass combinations like a dwarf, druid, or the machine? I'm going to say, okay, from my personal perspective, starting from way back with what would be called OSR now, old AD&D and D&D, you had your basic races and classes. And I think with the advent of 3.x and then Pathfinder, you had so many options to take your characters out of the cookie cutter mold of, a big dumb human fighter. Now you could do, a tiefling fighter who specializes in, ranged weapons or something weird, especially with your feet archetype combinations. I think people just want to be unique and different. They want to do something they haven't done before. I mean, that's my take. Grim, what do you think?
I think everyone wants to be a unique and special snowflake. And I think that a lot, as the guys were saying, a lot of people are coming in with sort of narrative forethought. I mean, there always used to be the odd player that would hand you a novel as their character background before you started playing. It's like, oh, for God's sake, can you at least bullet point this for me? But that's now become much more the norm rather than allowing the character to develop through play and so on, which is a way I prefer generally. I don't mind a little bit of background, but not a novel.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I think we're also... Yeah, I think we're also all a lot more aware of each other's games now as a role-playing hobby, culture, community. People don't like that word, but because of streamed games and so on, particularly things like Critical Role, you're measuring your own characters against these kind of standards when you probably shouldn't be necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that a dwarf, druid, or the machine, whatever, is the goal of the character, not the start. So you would start like a dwarf who becomes a druid along the way, kind of thing. That I don't want to have a total and complete character that I start playing from the beginning. I want to be a first level something other when he develops over time. And eventually he becomes a dwarf druid of the machine, or perhaps he creates the machine himself, whatever it is. That would be more interesting. But other than that, it's role playing, so people can do should and will do whatever you can possibly think of. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, the character dies or is ditched or whatever. A bit like a friend of ours who created a character, and it was like I think it was EPT again, or perhaps it was one of the ones like Traveller, where you actually have a whole part of the initial beginning is a sort of rule-driven system where you roll dice. And he created a character, and at the end of this sort of couple of hours of character creation, actually this bloke will just retire to a temple and he's a scholar. He'd never go adventuring because so he couldn't play him. It was like he created a professor of I don't know, philosophy at Oxford.
I would never run a game with non-humans. I don't allow players to be non-humans in my games anyway.
Oh, wow.
I just don't find it convincing.
Wait a minute, I've played some non-humans.
Oh, no.
It was Birdbrain the Clarker.
Yeah, I don't like it, though. And I wouldn't in a...
He was a great character.
It wouldn't make any
Dropping,
sense.
shitting on people as he flew over them and throwing fruit at them.
Player. Oh, okay.
No, not at all. No, I'm a whole bunch of different players according to how I role play. And that was how you role played a Clarker. They were cowardly little scouts, but also couldn't resist, pleasures of the flesh. That was a lot of fun.
I was thinking of Legend, i.e. Dragon Warriors, that you can't play as an elf or a dwarf or anything because that's meaningless. They're not like races. They're completely different. They're mythic creatures.
Dragon Warriors, yeah.
And I don't have classes, so the whole question wouldn't apply in any game that I can imagine, really. But I would think that, if you do have classes or roles like Druid, the question would be, what do the Druids think about it? Do they not mind? I don't even know what in D&D a dwarf is supposed to be. Is it supposed to be like a Tyrion Lannister, like a short person, or is it supposed to be
it's Lord of the Rings. It's Lord of the Rings dwarves.
Okay.
Yeah, little guys with beards.
Okay. Yeah. Well, depends whether
the
group they want to join would let them then, I guess. But anyway, I wouldn't run a game like that. So.
And Chaz continues, is it unique based on class or race or how you play it? Honestly, I'd say one kind of follows the other. I mean, if you're going to take on the mantle of, Water Genasi, Monk of the Four Winds, it's kind of like, you kind of you've picked the thing, then it's up to you to play it. So however you play it is going to be unique more so than the stuff that you put together. Because any two people could put together the exact same thing, but how they play it is going to make it intrinsically different. I mean, that's
and also, and Jamie was referring to GURPS earlier, you could put anything together in GURPS, and the more extremely unique you try and make it, the more boring and tedious it will actually be, because it will just be a list of crap ideas for a character, none of which actually inform how the character behaves. They're like badges that you just put lots of badges on. So that seems to, if somebody's going to go, I'm going to be a druid and I'm going to be a machine druid and I'm going to be a dwarf, they're doing a GURPS thing.
Yeah, well, not really though, because you need to have a system that has classes. So GURPS doesn't really have classes.
No, but I'm saying it's equivalent to the way in GURPS you can stick together a whole bunch of, you can cookie cutter a whole bunch of things together that don't have to fit. It doesn't make an interesting character though to do that.
You need to have it. The character needs to be what's the word?
Coherent.
Just with it, just with its own right. So things make sense. That it would have a character with a particular skill or whatever. But the class, any game system the class is in, which I tend not to play so much, that drives, that sort of forces that together. But even then, like Chainmail, we had fighters and magic users basically. But and you could have all sorts. That was open enough so you could mix all sorts of things together. So you could have all sorts of different kinds of warriors who might have a bit of magic in that, but there wasn't a sense that it all had to fit in with the world in such a way that it made sense. So a fighter with spells would be a temple guard and have a special role and be brought up and trained in that. It wouldn't just be random. And that's, like multi-classes in D&D. So you get, in the old days, you might have a sort of dwarf, bard, thief, monk. How does that happen? But if you can come up with a good reason how it does happen, well, give it a go. Yeah, the best ones I think are the ones that evolve organically. That's much more interesting.
Chaz says that World of Darkness doesn't have classes, but you still make wacky combos. Yeah, of course. I mean, World of Darkness being what it is, you could have the prototypical Malkavian, and you could play it any way you want to. You don't have to play it Fishmalk. You can go totally Hannibal Lecter and still be insane, but also be really scary.
You don't have to play it Fishmalk. Or you can go total Hannibal Lecter.
The Malkavians are a clan of vampires who are all insane, and the archetypical player would just be lol so random constantly,
wacky.
So wacky mad, not scary mad.
Also, we were talking earlier about sagas of the Icelanders, and I think if you read the sagas, somebody made the point: these aren't sort of warrior heroes who happen to farm; they're farmers who occasionally get into escalating feuds and start, fighting each other. And 90% of the characters in the game were just that. They were just Icelandic farmers. And they, on paper, they all had the same play sheet. I mean, I think Jamie's character and Inigo, who was playing the Gothi, those were the only two that didn't fit the template of basically being farmers who sometimes...
I played a Persian, a cultured Persian
slave.
Yeah, that the Vikings had captured when they're going down Rus and sold to the barbaric Icelanders. And so I was all like 11th century Persia, Islamic Enlightenment and all that, and chef. And,
yes, it was quite horrific.
Very cultured
to be taken to Iceland of all places in the
cold and really uncivilized.
Yeah.
Get off the boat.
Yeah.
Inshallah, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Well, the Persian. So, but he was actually a major Zoroastrian. Yeah. So, and then I was one of the other characters' slaves, and we both played that well, and it worked. It worked fine. It was great.
That reminds me very much of the
20-page long backstory.
The writings of Ibn Fahadlan when he went to visit the Vikings and the Turks. His writings about them, in a way.
Yes,
it's
horrified by the funerals, I think.
Oh yeah.
Well, the Icelanders, of course, are a bit more on the edge compared to don't have great cities. They're still struggling to eke an existence out of a rough landscape. So they're kind of like the most barbaric, not barbaric, that's unfair, but most uncultured of the Scandinavians at the time. Well, certainly.
Although they were writing the sagas, so there's that.
Yeah, that's true. Snorri Stingamy.
Yeah. Snorri
Sturluson.
Yeah, I've got one. I've got his Heimskringla right over there on the shelf. I had to look at. Arwen's talking about one of her players handed her a 20-page long backstory. My feeling is like if you're going to get invested in a character that much at the beginning, I'm kind of like, you better role play your ass off because because one or two lucky crits,
and there's that whole question of whether you I prefer to develop a character in play with a very little bit of an idea, or whether you design at the start. Some players seem to like to do that, but even if they do, and they'll hand me a lot of stuff, and I think I don't really need to know this. I mean, if they need to know it to play the character, great, and they can let me know from time to time some little bits of background. But I'm not going to. It's like if you were directing a movie, you don't need the actor to come over and say, "I've worked out everything about my character." Good. That will help when you have to do the scenes, but I don't need to know everything about that character. I don't want I don't even know why they would want to do so much locking down so early, actually. But
oh gosh, Chaz, that's for you, Grim.
Lots of arguments over who's sheep.
Immediately. What are you doing?
You don't want a bunch of undead Vikings to rise up.
Yeah, God, wait till the winter.
Oh my gosh.
Have you got any more questions, Shirt? I've got one more.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Me and Shirt have talked about this before, and it's also come up talking to other games designers. There is some almost ineffable quality to British designed role-playing games, and it's hard to pin down exactly what that is and why that is. I've got a few ideas. I think the influence of the comic 2000 AD was big on Warhammer. Obviously, the Orcs are English football hooligans. There's a love of the underdog. There's a love of dark humor. Like when the Americans play D&D, it's all shiny and wizards and fireballs.
Yeah.
When we play it, it's some lovely filth down here. It's much more Jabberwocky.
He hasn't got shit all over him.
Yeah, it's much more Jabberwocky or Monty Python and the Holy Grail and so on. Yeah, there's a definite dark humor, satirical side to it, but I still can't quite pin down what the difference is and why it is. Do you have any ideas at all?
I have a book that was written by Ivan Morris, who was an American academic, and it's called The Nobility of Failure. And he talks about how the British and the Japanese both really admire underdogs who fail gloriously. The Battle of Malden effect. Nobody even remembers anything written by the people who won the Battle of Malden. They're only interested in the people who lose it. We're interested in Hastings, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a little bit of that. I remember one of the great legend campaigns we played in. We'd sailed off in a ship to the west because the latter days were upon us and we expected the end of the world, and we were a bunch of scummy mercenaries who had no social status, and we fell in with this preacher who was a nutcase, but he was promising we're going to the promised land, and at halfway there we realized that there was no promised land. He was just a nutcase. All the pilgrims were going to die at sea. We ended up on a distant shore, and we were being. I think we finally faced the Angel of Death, and my character just shot an arrow at him. We knew we were dead, and it was the Angel of Death, and there was nothing we were going to do about it. It was just to die defiantly on a nasty bit of shore in the freezing sleet, and that seems quite a British approach to role-playing. If the Night King comes for you, you're not going to get a fucking dagger in the Night King. They're not going to beat him that way. It's not going to happen. So just accept that. And I think we must thank Margaret Thatcher for a lot of this.
I was going to say.
Yeah, because growing up, that gave me a real feeling that we were completely stuffed, and that was the right approach to stories, really.
Yeah. I'm getting a similar feeling these days, actually, to how I used to feel back then.
No. It's always good for creativity to live in this kind of a time.
Yeah, and when there's a strong overculture, you get an equally powerful counterculture. I think that's
yes.
That's
I will say though, when Dragon Warriors was being re-released, somebody said, "Oh, you know what you could do is you could put the British flag on the knight's shield," and that seems such an un-British idea to me to do that.
I think there's also a sense of a kind of shared Northwest European folklore and storytelling history. And that's because we had Vikings and Normans and Romans all in. So there's this sort of mythical storytelling that goes back to 3,000 years. The ancient Britons had all of their stories. And then on top of that is pile of Roman tales, then Saxon, then Norman, then Danish and Norwegian. So we have a very rich folklore to draw on. I think that affects how we tell stories. And I think that's true of most European countries. And that might be a big thing that's different from America, say, or Australia or other newer countries. We don't have the old world. Cynical bitterness. Born of failure and defeat.
Well, we do have the Old West and the Civil War, so
yes. Well, yes, that's also very true. But that's interesting too. Like Stephen King in America very much taps into American folklore in that sense, like in the Dark Tower, which really annoyed me. I read loads of them all, and the ending really pissed me off. But anyway, that's a different story. I just love the whole cowboy thing too, and that's very rich in its own way. But it's still about new frontiers and all of that kind of thing. Whereas British is old. There are no frontiers in that sense anymore. It's much more Mel the Bonnet than it is the Young Kingdoms sort of thing.
It's been interesting to see how Slavic folklore has been becoming interesting and has appeared in games and things like The Witcher and so on, because it still feels European, but it's also new to us.
What was that game we played? The Kingdom Come, the Bohemian. That was really interesting feel. And that's still that could be very Dragon Warriors, but it was Eastern European. But
we've got all the old Celtic myth and so on as well.
That's another thread. Yeah. It's very rich.
But I don't think it's just having a mythology to draw on, is it? I mean, what Grimm was talking about was the different ethic behind it. I mean, and you can.
I think that influences how we write.
I mean, I certainly. It's very hard to pin down because I read a lot of American and British literature, and there's definitely a different feel. Like I think if I'm going to read Dickens, that's going to be very different from if I'm reading, Hemingway or something like that. It's not just that they're different writers. You could almost read them blind and go, that's definitely for the British pile, or the European pile, that's for the American pile. There's a different kind of ethic going on.
Yeah, well, also that's the interesting thing about Conan in a way, because you get Robert E. Howard, a Texan in the old school of it in the 30s and that, and he takes all of European mythology, repackages it and represents it in a brand new way, which is a lot about what America is. And that's what made it so interesting and good, because it's both worlds in a sense.
Oh yeah. I pretty much cut my teeth on Conan and it was funny. Yeah.
Stop trying to eat them.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is I didn't actually read Howard until I got to college and got a big giant book of all of Howard's original stories and started reading them one after another. Yeah. And I read them slowly, and I read them 2 or 3 times. My friends would say, well, why are you still reading that? It's been months. Haven't you finished that book by now? I said, no, I'm just taking my time with it. And then like, why? And I said, because he's not making any more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
it's the same with the Tarzan books, really. And it's also really interesting to look at Conan versus Elric. So Elric is full of old world, ancient empires and all that kind of tired decadence. And Conan is all about hard thrusting survival in a difficult world and how the old worlds are corrupt and how it's just so American.
It's still tricky to pin it down, though, isn't it? Because you think
that's just one thing amongst
many.
It's
clearly throughout the Elric stories, there's a feeling of tragedy that you're not going to get from Conan. But that's not unique to British writing, because Buffy also has throughout the series a feeling of tragedy. So it's clearly there's an overlap, but we can say that there are 2 diagrams that overlap, and that this sort of a bit more American and this is sort of a bit more European, but there's obviously a fuzzy area in between.
Well, there's also a big change in American storytelling from the 30s to the modern day.
Yeah.
So just in the same way that British storytelling in the 30s was still kind of imperial. You had heroes like
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Oh, before that. No, okay, the 30s. Yeah.
Yeah, after Sherlock Holmes, I'm thinking of, goodness, like Dick Barton, for instance, was like some book so much as radio, but he's like the classic public schoolboy hero of the 30s. I say these bloody bring civilization to the world kind of thing.
Snortopupus is talking about how his GM was captivated by Moorcock, especially the Elric books, and took our campaign down the road. It became epic.
You're going to be inspired by anybody. I don't think Moorcock's a bad place to start.
Yeah.
And Elric is such an opposition of a Conan type hero, because this is a guy who starts off with everything and over the course of the books loses everything only to be stabbed to death by his own damn sword at the end. So wow.
Yeah.
After betraying his friends.
Yeah, after betraying and killing all of his friends.
Yeah. Well, what more could you want from a campaign? Come on, that's fantastic.
That's true.
And players are always going to try and push it the heroic way. So any underlying feeling that pushes it the other way might be a good thing.
It is kind of funny. At the start of my gaming career, there tended to be a lot more party versus party intrigue with characters against characters, that sort of thing, either secretly or over the tabletop. Just straight up, just challenging each other to fights, straight up. And we were younger, but as we've gotten older, and I've gotten older, there tends to be a lot less of that, and it tends to be more like, well, I'd really like to have a more cohesive game where we all just kind of get along and do our own thing. I mean, we still argue and bitch and stuff like that in game, but a lot of the just outright plotting against each other is just kind of like, man, that's so tired. Let's not do this. I don't know. Is it something you guys have also experienced?
I've noticed that, but I assume it's simply because we used to game. It was like. It was hard to tell whether we were in real life or the game a lot of the time, because we might be gaming several times during the week, apart from the main session, and people would come for little one-off bits, So we would be constantly dealing with those characters as a parallel life, and we were young and we didn't have families and things to worry about. Then, as people have got older, I mean, now the games I belong to, that people before the pandemic would have to turn up after work, fit in maybe 3 hours of gaming. They've got to eat as well, and then they're going to go home and cross London or wherever they've got to get to. So they seem to want a much more focused game, which I feel without
no time for backstabbing.
No time for backstabbing, but
What a
also no
shame,
time for the level of commitment that, because backstabbing arises out of you having a genuine commitment to a character. So it doesn't mean that you don't sit at the table and think, I want to well, some people do, I want to backstab somebody. You just think, I can't logically continue with what I need to do and let that person live, and that would be good, but that level of commitment is hard to get.
You're right, it's a good point. You can't get into it as much, especially now on Zoom. Role playing on Zoom, I don't really enjoy that. I like to see a face of this person I'm stabbing in the back, in front of me, as it were, not via the internet.
Well, fortunately, my gaming group still meets face to face every week.
Cool.
So I'm very lucky.
Unfortunately, my regular group, we've got several immunocompromised people, so we're not going to be able to meet till this is all done and dusted. So it's unfortunate.
So, Grim, what does that say? Problematic degenerate or problematic pomegranate?
Problematic degenerate.
Yeah. I was thinking, what is a problematic pomegranate?
I can think of several, but the ideologues on the right call me a degenerate, and the ideologues on the left call me problematic.
What am I, Jamie? What am I?
So you're the yellow striped line in the matter. What?
Caution.
I've been called a woke communist and a transphobe. I don't know where that came from. I think it's because I supported free speech, and that immediately, without any further reference to trans issues, made me a transphobe. So, I've managed to piss off both extremes as well.
All the best people have.
Yes.
I just stay out of it.
Yeah, no.
Although it was interesting, someone had just put up something about inter-party feuds spilling over into real life.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've ever had that, have we, Dave? Yeah.
No, I mean, we would just... people would
always
game
able
and
to
then
keep
move.
it in
You knew it was just for the... in fact, I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think, actually, thinking about it, I think Patrick was a little bit killed when I had Panjang killed in the Tekamel game. But he got over it in a week or so. That took a little.
Didn't talk to you for a week, but
a week. He was because it was a particular surprise to him. Although I think to nobody else who knew that I was, they all knew I was going to have to kill him at some point.
Yeah,
I only ever ran into that sort of
Doritos violence.
Yes.
I only ever really ran into that kind of vindictiveness and out of character and in character crossover when I was involved in a big international live action roleplay society, and people would use their positions in the society to cheat and to favor their characters. But in smaller groups, I think where you're all friends,
like if it was in a small group, the GM gave a few levels to his own characters.
It was larger scale than that, but I think the reason why was because people didn't really know each other. Whereas if you're playing a regular small campaign, you're generally friends, right? So you don't want to be a dick to each other,
Some people, one of our players, I remember we had a game that was in the Mass Effect universe, and one of the player characters had sided with the authorities because he was kind of a intergalactic federal agent type, and one of the other players was really pissed off. He said, from a party unity point of view, and that made no sense to me because I would take Barker's view, which is there are no NPCs or player characters, there are just characters. Some happen to be played by players, but you shouldn't think we players will all stick together, even though we're on different sides against these other. You should be.
It's not a cooperative board game, is it? Yeah,
it's not a board game, and I was just reminded.
It can be if you want to play it like that.
In live action, Leo Hartas was the
artist
on Dragon Warriors was telling me how he did a bit of LARPing with his son, and his son's a teenager at the time, and they went off and there was a kind of feast in the moot hall, and Leo was playing a kind of master assassin, but they knew Leo was kind of suspect, so he was sending his son in to poison this guy's food, and this guy was a big guy in the in the adventure, but he'd fallen foul of another faction that wanted him dead. So they said, we want the food poison. So Leo sent Finn into the hall, and they're actually sitting out in the woods with this genuine wooden hall that's been built. And he goes in, and he said he came out to the campfire, and I said, did you do it? And he said, I was a bit frightened, Dad. I think, what if they spotted me? And he said, son, you've got to get back in there. Remember the tradition of our family. Get back in there and poison that bloke. And he said, I realized I was giving a pep talk to my son about the need to murder somebody.
That's a lot of fun.
Oh my
Kill him, my son. Kill him.
So proud.
Yeah.
He killed his first man. I'm so happy. Oh my gosh. Well, gentlemen, I've really enjoyed this so much. I could go on probably for hours more. I'm sure you guys have things to do, but and as it is, I've kept you longer than I actually said I would. I told you it'd be an hour, and here we are. I hope you've enjoyed the time.
Well, it is an hour from the time you originally told me.
I know that's my
Time
fault.
zones are difficult.
Yeah,
4
time
a.m.
zones are. Yeah.
Well, in the tradition we started with, I will say it's been quite fun.
Oh, thank you very much.
I will
hope
say
sometime you come back.
it has been fun for you, shirted one, and the grim-bearded thing. Grim-bearded honey badger.
Yes. I've also had a perfectly adequate time.
Yes.
Perfectly adequate. Very British.
Yes.
I'm entirely whelmed.
There are very few things we could have done instead that we would have enjoyed more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. And as I said, this is kind of our season finale. I've got to go put the series on hiatus for a little bit, but we'll be back, periodically during the year, and we'll be back in full swing again come June of the next year. But I want to thank you guys for coming on and sharing your time with us. And I really enjoyed it.
About what you love, which is, of course, backstabbing people.
I have to admit, I do several shows on YouTube, and I think I've confessed to Grim and a few people. I said, this is what makes me the happiest is doing Dungeons and Discussions, and it really makes me sad to have to put it on hiatus. But
needs must.
Is that because Jamie has broken it for you?
Yes, Jamie has. Jamie, you're completely at fault. The Dark Lord has struck.
Good, excellent. You think it's a fault? That's one of my skills. It's bonus trait.
We do still have our special announcement, don't we?
Yes, and we do have a special announcement for this finale, this big blowout, this thing that all you guys have been tuning in for. We got 13 of you now, so now's the time to make it grim.
A lot of you over the course of Dungeons and Discussions have expressed your desire to play a game. So we're going to organize 1 or 2 sessions, probably on Sundays, I think we said.
I think so.
Yeah, where if you really want to experience the full joy and wonder of role-playing, then I will be GMing for you for a couple of sessions. So you can get a taste.
Sounds problematic to me. Or possibly even degenerate.
Hopefully both.
Hopefully both.
Almost certainly, given it's me running it.
And
problematically degenerate.
And inspired by Grim, I've also decided I'm going to do this as well. Obviously, not to take away his thunder. It'll be like right after him. But I am planning on running Godbound. So if you've ever wanted to really experience the power of a god in character form,
do you play a god?
Yes, you actually play demigods who are basically at the lowest tier of their power and grow. And you can't do it through just regular adventuring. You actually have to go out and do things and commit power to places in order to obtain worshippers who will sacrifice to you and everything else. And the level of power is just insane between mere mortals and demigods. It's really, really, it's something else. And it's a very easy system to run. So.
And I haven't decided what I'm running yet. Possibly Morkborg, because it's nice and simple for new people. So.
And grungy and brutal and
grungy
dark.
And brutal and nasty. Yes. Which we like.
Ash, you are playing with us.
He gets no choice.
Yes. I have to point out our friend Esh here, guys. Esh started this with us, and he's never played a role-playing game in his entire life. Poor boy. But He has stuck with us faithfully throughout the entire season and learned and picked up stuff, and we're going to give him his chance to finally play.
And hopefully murder him.
And hopefully murder him. If it's Morkborg, it's going to be a short death.
Yes. Okay.
So how are we going to prune our players, Grim?
I don't know. We'll see how many people ask first.
Okay, yeah, that's it. You can catch either me, T-shirted historian, on Twitter at the T-shirted one, or you can catch Grim at the Grimasaur, and we'll put links up in the description. And you can contact us. We do have limited spaces. I mean, we can't really run a game with 13 people. Sorry. So it is kind of first come, first serve. But Ash, your spot is reserved.
Okay. I think that's everything.
All right. Well,
okay,
thank you guys once again.
I'll just wear my GI helmet. Wait, no, that's not right, isn't it? No, I can't quite get the angle right. There we go. It's a replica,
vintage.
sadly.
The term Dope Boy could have been invented for you, Jamie.
That's World War One, though. This is a GI helmet. World War Two.
Yeah, World War II.
Boy. Oh, then I've got my British version. This is an actual antique from the 1940s.
Oh, look at that.
Put that lie down. This is a warden's, a London bombing warden's helmet.
Do you have any edged weapons you'd like to show us?
He already showed us the sword.
Oh, okay.
That one, there's my Indonesian one.
Oh,
it's really sharp and nasty.
Got a Roman one?
There's a Roman dagger up on the wall, but then I have to get that down. That was a present from Dave. And I've got a Gurkha kukri.
Kukri? You've got a kukri from me as well?
That's a bugger to get out.
Okay.
Was that from you?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. I've forgotten. I thought it was from someone else. Oh, well.
Stop being entertaining. We need to stop the show.
You dangerous British people.
Yes, we are. Well, dangerous in my tiny little study at the top of my house. Yes. I'm armed to the teeth for the zombie apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
God save anyone who interrupts you while you're working.
There you go.
Or
tries
that's
to steal
fine.
his whiskey.
Anyone interrupts me while I'm playing a computer game, then they die. When I'm working, please interrupt me. I've just discovered I'm just playing a game called Shortest Trip to Earth.
Oh, I love that game.
Yeah, it's like kind of an FTL clone, but they just sort of up the graphics.
Yeah, it's endlessly entertaining.
Yeah, I'm just getting into it now. Having just finished Monster Train, which was, have you played that?
No, I haven't.
Rogue deck building sort of, it's really so many different variants. Makes it kind of interesting and also annoying.
Gosh, I don't want to stop.
Yeah.
I don't want to stop the conversation, but anyway, we're gonna go with the outro, guys. Don't run away real quick, but stick around and we'll. But to everyone out there in the chat, get a hold of Grim and I. We're gonna set these games up. We're gonna make it happen.
Get a hold of Grim and him and kill them.
Yes, shall kill you. And then until next season and until our next show, thank you very much for hanging out with us for this season and have fun. But don't have too much fun with your friends.
Goodbye.
Look, the Dungeons and Dragons ride!